Through his leadership, the Ohio Innovation Fund has become a blueprint for how venture can drive not just returns, but regional transformation.
The ones that succeed are easy to talk about with a buddy at a bar. If they think that, sometimes they almost think like, okay, I have the answer, maybe the rest of humanity isn't just smart enough to get it yet. That's very dangerous and a red flag for us.
Bill Baumel is the managing director of Ohio Innovation Funds and Midwest venture capitalist with over 20 years of experience investing in and partnering with founders to scale game-changing, high-impact technology and life sciences startups. His work spans areas like generative AI, contributing to multiple IPOs, including in Panera, Dexcom, and Vimeo, and major acquisitions by companies such as NVIDIA, SAP, Oracle, and Medtronic.
If you partner with all the data that is there with these AI models to help in areas such as diagnosis and drug discovery and stuff like that, I think there's a whole way to open that up.
Find what Built for This means to you.
For me,
All right, welcome back to another episode of Built for This, where we dive into stories and strategies behind the builders shaping the future of business, leadership, and innovation. Today, I'm joined by Bill Baumel, Managing Director of the Ohio Innovation Fund, venture capitalist, educator, and passionate advocate for fueling the next generation of Midwest innovation. Bill has spent over 20 years bridging the best of Silicon Valley with the incredible untapped potential of America's heartland, investing in breakthrough startups in tech, healthcare, and beyond. Through his leadership, the Ohio Innovation Fund has become a blueprint for how venture can drive not just returns, but regional transformation. In this episode, we're going to explore Bill's journey from his roots in finance and tech to leading one of the most dynamic regional venture ecosystems in the country. And then we're going to talk about what defines great founders, where AI and innovation are headed, and why the next decade might belong to entrepreneurs outside the traditional hubs. Welcome.
thank you, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I always love to kind of start in for how it began, because I think some of the most impactful pieces of this podcast is that people get to hear themselves in somebody that they may or may not think they have anything in common with when they look at where they want to get to, or almost that feeling of overwhelm to expand and kind of figure out what you want to do as you continue to kind of find your way in this world. So I'd love to start off with kind of learning a little bit more about you and your background, and how you kind of got started in the finance world.
Yeah, so I went to Ohio State undergraduate, and my first position was out at Deloitte and Touche in San Francisco, and had a unique opportunity there. Besides working with large clients, I actually worked in their KKR outsourced due diligence practice, so I got to understand private equity. I also worked on a number of venture, backed startup companies, and what I really fell in love with was the kind of futuristic innovation and growth around startups. Kind of trying to predict the future, trying to create the future, and all that. It was much more exciting to me than kind of either optimizing processes or kind of having incremental improvements. That was really exciting. And I went back to the University of Michigan to get my MBA. And there I was a teaching assistant for the venture capital course. And actually, Michigan and Ohio State are big rivals. And so the actual Michigan professor got his PhD at Ohio State and played hockey at Ohio State. So it was a good, got a kind of good connection there. And so that kind of just solidified my love for venture capital. And really, one of the things I love most about it is it kind of goes across the board. We're working on innovative technology, innovative healthcare solutions. We're providing strategic sales, marketing, operational, financial advice. So kind of, taps all the different parts of business. And the other thing is it's very measurable, because at the end of the day, investors give us $1 and they expect $3 back. And if you don't do that, the foundations and such that are limited partners do not re-up with you on these 10-year funds. So I also like having a little bit of a scoreboard. I coach a lot of athletics and stuff like that and participate in them. So it's kind of nice also to kind of have a objective scoreboard up there, just kind of see how you've done.
Yeah. And I'm curious kind of through, if you think about the early pieces of your career, and you mentioned you got exposure to startups, that environment. And I always kind of find there's sort of two groups of people from my experience working with entrepreneurs in startup space is you get in there and you're either thriving off the chaos, disorganization, the constant pivots each day, and kind of that I believe in the big moonshot. I have zero idea how we're going to get here, but I'm put all my trust in this person who's leading us there. Or people come in and it is I'd almost talk about, like, their Achilles heel where there's n like, because of the lack of structure and process and there's no manuals, and I always think about when we brought people in from, like, big companies because we needed the rigor, but them coming in and either they were able to really adapt what they had learned and bring it back into chaos to make organization, or deer in headlights and didn't even know where to start, being so used to always having a guideline, a handbook, a map on how to get there. So I'm curious if there was like an experience you felt where you had that same kind of excitement where you're like, yes, this is what I want to spend my time kind of figuring out and diving deeper into, that kind of sparked that passion for sort of the work that you or companies you focus on now.
Yeah, I think both. One is at Deloitte, I was working with a number of clients, both larger and smaller. And the smaller startups, you would talk and make suggestions, and then things would happen within, days or weeks, or worst case, a couple months of evaluation. I actually did an internship at Procter& and Gamble as well during the summer of my MBA at Michigan. And that's probably one of the gold standards in terms of, how companies are run, process, all that. Like you said, it just wasn't a personal fit. I did well. Talked about having me come back, but just culturally and everything else, like you said, there's not a right or wrong answer, but there's people that thrive on, like you said, chaos, disruption, lack of information, kind of making the best decision you can and quickly pivoting
Yeah.
based on new data and continue to pivot and iterate going forward. And
Yeah.
there's some people that just like more thorough analysis, more information, more structure, all that type of thing. So I've always been one that really, thrives on that chaos. And as we'll talk about later, I mean, some of our, greatest successes have been in our current portfolio as well. Some of the ones making the greatest progress have been absolute pivots where we
Yeah.
started in one direction and said, "Oh, bigger opportunities here." Now we may have kept what's there, but kind of, had to make that pivot. And that's really exciting for me, kind of the unknown. And part of it too is like, not just managing what's there, optimizing Tide's market share or brand or what have you. It's creating brand new markets or doing things people say you can't do.
Yeah.
One of the early investments was that my previous fund made while I was at Silicon Valley for about 15, 17 years was Dexcom. And for
Mhm.
so long, people had tried to, including large companies like J&J, have a continuous glucose monitor for diabetics. So they don't have to prick their finger every 5 minutes. They could get reading and understand if they're too high, too low, and kind of take some insulin if they're on the way up going too high. And just, creating markets like that are just very exciting and very rewarding. So just kind of something that I kind of fall in love with. And even at Deloitte, the larger clients were always nice. We got Clorox and Charles Schwab and all that, which were great. Safeway was one of the
Yeah.
clients of KKR. But then at the time, I forget what it's called, but there's a retailer that KKR was thinking about, Sharper Image, that KKR was thinking about acquiring. When they do due diligence, and just the fast pace and kind of all that was just very, very exciting.
Yeah, I always think it's kind of what I call the almost intangible metric on a dashboard where you can't, in a sense, you can measure it because it's visceral in a room and when like team dynamics have it, but you can't necessarily measure when that pops up and that you're gonna really like love and thrive in that. And I'm curious about your experience kind of building your career in Silicon Valley. Everybody has a bit of a different experience when they get into that world, especially depending on what era of Silicon Valley you entered into, of either being, this wild, fast-paced innovation, money everywhere, or having really bad experiences and getting IP taken or, lots of heartbreak and deals going sour. So I'm curious of kind of, we'll call it character building ethos and how you even look at entrepreneurs and deals, sort of how that happened for you and how it's shaped where you're at today.
I kind of have been within Silicon Valley since the late 90s. So I was, part of Silicon Valley when things were going absolutely crazy in the late 90s around the internet and, e-toys, which was an $8 billion market cap that went bankrupt and all that. I was there for the unfortunate first crash after, the events of September 11th, there for the comeback, there for kind of when the world stopped in 2008, 2009. We're assuming every bank was going out of business. And
Yeah, the world was
and
dark.
the world was like, all the money was going away. The next, actually we did a number of follow-on investments in 2008, 2009, and all of a sudden in 2011 we sold Blue Arc to Nachi Data for $800 million and made 10 times our money. So it's there for that part of it, and then kind of up until 2017. So I've kind of seen the whole gamut, and a couple of the biggest learnings. One is whether you're starting a company, investing in a company, the ones that succeed are easy to talk about with a buddy at a bar. So you like, if you can say, okay, if you're a diabetic, would you rather prick your finger every 5 minutes and kind of, figure out where you're at? Or would you like just a continuous reading that automatically let you know that? That's a very straightforward thing. But even on things that are more technical, I have one company, and not many people know about indium phosphide lasers. So, but imagine if you could take in a switcher router 200 to 300 components that JDS Uniphase and others make and shrink those all into a chip the size of your fingernail. Think about the size savings, the cost savings. Think about how powering through that software. Well, that was Infinera. So it's something you could like explain to someone, even if they don't understand it technically, say, wow, that could be cool. I can understand why they'd be successful. So I'm really looking for, kind of companies that can concisely and impactfully state what they do, because that means they really understand what they can do. They then can probably explain that to customers, partners, people are trying to hire. And the other thing is at the end of the day, we're measuring on cash and cash. So you can have all the marketing you want, but at the end of the day, you have to have substantial value. And having exited over 20 companies via IPO or M&A, at the end of the day, those companies that have very strong, very unique IP in explosive markets are the ones that get the best returns. The most painful discussions are we have kind of a nice incremental software, let's say, and you're talking to, let's just pick a company, Oracle, just, and they say, well, we could buy you or could make this. And that means you're really going to get, on pricing, you're going to get driven down. um, and I think a lot of people have learned their lesson that with any partner, you need to be very careful in what you expose to them, because you will find for a lot of times, a lot of people found out that what they thought they had that was unique, they kind of talked to a partner about, they kind of went dark. You'll see that partner launching in 6 months to 9 months to a year. So it is, and particularly in California, non-competes historically are, you know,
Not enforceable.
not enforceable. And so we have one company, our second fund, and our most, I should say, so our most recent fund, that literally we formed a partnership with someone, and someone else comes in and starts offering signing bonuses of $12.5 million to engineers.
Wow.
So that's another way to kind of shift,
Yeah.
talent and
Not to
IP
compete
over.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's, you have to be very, I forget what the saying is, but you have to be very kind of worried about what could happen, but yet plowing ahead like you're going to conquer the world. It's kind of a juxtaposition of both.
Yeah, and how do you look at when you're meeting with these founders and entrepreneurs? Because we live in such an interesting time where, again, depending on what time you have somebody, for some people, of a Elon Musk era and like loud, divisive, controversial, and nobody can doubt that he's obviously highly intelligent and, can see things that nobody else could at a time, but obviously impact in terms of a work culture or demand or a way of operating in the world. And I'm curious, obviously, because there is a profitability component and you're weighing, hey, if I get into these deals of really just to make money and not necessarily as I am super values aligned about the impact that this company is going to look at the world. I'm just curious from your experience of how much weight is kind of put on who is leading it and their personality, and kind of the risk associated with that versus, okay, what's the core business here? And regardless of them, can that take off?
Luckily in the Midwest, the deals don't close as quickly. So Silicon Valley, like when we did Infinera, we literally had 2 weeks to go from meeting to closure on that deal out. A lot of the deals in the Midwest, you may have a month or two to work with the entrepreneurs. And so we typically like to meet them very early on when maybe they're pre-seed or very early seed stage, get to know them, get to think how they think, see how they progress, see if there's good chemistry there. It's a lot of times we're looking for openness to feedback, because if they think that, sometimes they almost think like, okay, I have the answer. Maybe the rest of humanity isn't just smart enough to get it yet.
Yeah.
That's very dangerous and a red flag for us. We're really looking for someone that wants to kind of interact and work with us,
Hmm.
kind of exchange ideas, get our feedback, because then they'll be much more open to market feedback. They'll be much more collaborative and work much more better with the internal, team there and building up that team. But you do hit on a key issue, is that at the end of the day, there's been, whether it's Larry at Oracle, whether it's Elon Musk, whether it's Zuckerberg, whether
Yeah.
it's Bezos, whether it's past and present Apple, there are very strong personalities that tend to drive very hard, And it's almost like I think in the Apple story, it talked about that level of tension, kind of almost like creating a diamond. So there is that whole. It can't be too touchy feely and too kind of non accountability because literally it's not if Tide doesn't put forward a good program for the year, you can adjust. Maybe you switch your brand manager and adjust. If we as a startup don't make the progress we need to make over 6, 12, 18 months, we could be gone, right? I mean, we just don't get more funding. We're closing down, and and the company just no longer exists. So there is that balance. I've been lucky in that I've been able to invest in companies for the most part that kind of fulfill a mission. I'll tell you, I only do about 20% healthcare and 80% kind of tech. And tech is like AI, cybersecurity, SaaS, and then some biotech and med tech. Um, I personally get a lot more reward out of the med tech side, seeing how, the Dexcom continuous glucose monitor affected, diabetics, seeing how a new biotech, drug for cystic fibrosis helped that population, like a Claremedix and stuff like that. So, um, but we are measured on our returns. We're put up against the Cambridge in terms of like who's top quartile, and no matter how good what you're doing sounds, if you don't deliver returns, and venture is very different than private equity. If you
Yep.
look at venture, the top quartile, the return from the top quartile is higher, let's say, than the return from the top quartile in private equity. But if you
Hmm.
look at the bottom half of venture, a lot of those funds are losing money. Where in private equity, kind of a mediocre private equity fund is like, 7%. You're not losing money. So you got to, and we'll probably get this later. That's kind of one of the reasons with our high innovation fund was starting
Yeah.
this. I'm kind of a founder of a startup in itself. So I
Hmm.
get to set that culture in terms of like who we
Yeah.
hire, how we work with our companies and all that. So that's been one of the benefits of, Ohio Innovation Fund is just being able to establish that culture and focus on the companies that we want to focus on.
I think that's really amazing. And I know you mentioned, the speed in which Silicon Valley operate to close deals and that pace. I understand also, from a competitive landscape, depending on what piece you're in, the tension of like we have to move fast, slowing down is not an option. And there are companies who fail fast really quickly and like iterate, and get there quicker. But I'm curious, after your time there and, different people I've spoken with, it's either you kind of, we'll call it live and breathe and you die in that environment, or you're just like, I actually need to slow down. Like, it's not healthy for me to continuously be at such a fast pace. And I think also, I mean, I've had exposure, but probably not as intense from a back to back deal perspective. But I imagine there's just kind of this nagging, almost like human piece of the purpose driven of it. Like, am I just really trying to make a bunch of people money, or do I actually really care about the work that I'm doing and how it's impacting the world? And I'm curious if, making that shift, was it more to kind of go back homeward bound a little bit, or to take kind of everything you had experienced and learned, but like, I think we could do this in a different way where it just doesn't feel so, for lack of a better term, aggressive.
Part of it was definitely the draw to my home state, and that would include, having gone to Ohio State, being a Reds fan, a Bengals fan, kind of all the above. Part of it was, like you said, to bring together everything I had done in the past. Particularly one of the things I was known for out in Silicon Valley was starting with very little and creating, something out of it. So I, coming with a handful of people with a small team, being able to scale that team up, get a product to market, make good progress, drive to, 10, 20, 50, $100 million in revenue. That is kind of my forte. Similarly to your question earlier on like big company versus startups, once a company gets to $100 million in revenue, it's the board meetings change. There's not that weekly interaction. It's usually a quarterly board meeting. You're kind of going over plan versus projection. There may be a few key strategic issues. You walk in the place, you don't know all the faces, you don't know all the names.
Yeah.
That's when things start getting less interesting for me. So I'm
I'm
definitely
in
not.
the same mode. I need the
Yeah.
excitement other than just like, I'll call it maintenance mode. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So that's, and I just love, that startup culture, that startup team. We had one company, Blue Arc, I know, where everyone in our companies gets equity. So we have an option pool of 20% or so, plus what founders have, and every single person in our companies get equity. So we're all rowing the same direction. And so
Yeah.
when the salespeople come back in the door, there's a lady that was one of the office managers at one of our companies that was asking them like, "Oh, how's your trip?" And like, "Oh, great way." There's like, "Look, did you close any sales?" She wanted to know because she has equity, right? And whether that equity is successful now, depending on their level, that equity may mean on success a new car, a new home, or it may mean financial independence for and becoming an angel investor yourself. Depending on your levels, you kind of keep moving up. But that whole teamwork and kind of rowing in the same direction is important. And once it gets to be bigger and bigger and bigger, that's where my interest goes down. So, really, and that's what kind of the Midwest has a lot of innovation here. You even look on the healthcare side with things like the Wexner Medical Center, Nationwide Children's Hospital, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo,
Yeah.
all that. There's a ton of raw material to work with. There isn't a ton of experience in taking that raw material and creating and scaling and growing highly successful companies. And so
Yeah.
that kind of match in terms of my skill set with that raw material, I think was a good thing. I also think my personality in being able to work with founders and team members not so much in a way that kind of fits with the
Is it
Midwestern culture because there's a great work ethic. But it's a little bit different, maybe how you might hold a meeting here than you would, let's say, in the early days of Apple
Yeah.
with Steve Jobs. So that balance, being able to do that. And, one of the things I try and do here is just build up trust. And that's, in Silicon Valley, people are so focused on success so quick that they'll basically take any information really quickly, process it, either adjust or throw it out based on what they feel about it. Here, it's more building that relationship. We have to say, okay, the founder may tell me so much information, and I give them some feedback, and we talk about it. And then
Yeah.
the fact that they gave me some information that maybe wasn't the greatest because this didn't work or that didn't work, it didn't come back to bite them, and that
Yeah.
we're all together in this, and it's never held against them, and we keep
Yeah.
moving forward. And then I give some advice, and oh, that kind of made sense. That's helpful, and it kind of just expands that relationship over time. Where within a little while,
Mhm.
you basically have an open relationship where there's a free flow of information, a highly trusting relationship. And I mean, one of our companies trusted me to go out over a summer and think about a pivot into a whole new market. And if I look at this year, this was a company, eFuse, that was growing to we were approaching about $10 million in revenue. And that was going to grow at a pretty nice pace, maybe 50%, but not keep doubling. So we did a little bit of a pivot into a new area. I worked over the summer, kind of talked to the founder. We came up with it. We got some additional people on board with expertise and advisors in the area. And now we'll probably do about $25 million this year, which is a year later. And half that revenue will be in the new segment that we launched. So that relationship is critical. And that also gets to, some of the raw material here is the people. In this case, the founder of eFuse was a 2018 intern that graduated from college in 2019. And he started the company in 2020, and over the last 5 years has grown it from nothing to, over $20 million in revenue. So,
I love
that's
those stories. They make the bad ones seem like not
yeah,
as bad, and you're like, "Okay, there's some good things."
yeah, yeah.
I'm curious, yeah. In terms of, when you're talking about being able to really build and nurture those relationships and give, those entrepreneurs some space to probably have a little bit less fear associated with, we'll call it the money when saying like, this is not going well, or, yep, we're off our numbers. Here we go again. And being able to ask for that help and get your expertise and guidance, I can imagine is just so meaningful. And I feel like with the pace and just sheer speed that the world's moving right now, especially in this AI bubble, I think there almost feels not like there is a lot of room to breathe or slow down because it's changing so quickly. And how do you hold on to human connection, but yet not lose sight of how fast things are moving that are going to be monumental to either the service you're providing or the tech that you're building? And so I'm kind of curious, how you're looking at that with your current portfolio or companies that you're looking at potentially investing in from that venture landscape in that like tech healthcare space, because healthcare to me is like the biggest industry ready for, disruption I mean, it always has for a myriad of reasons, but how are you sort of moving quickly, but also like giving room to breathe in this type of environment?
And part of it's deal selection. So we are not as focused on what I'll call the quick hits in AI, like, okay, we're gonna have a little bit of something supplementary to what Salesforce does until they come out with their own AI agents or just kind
Yeah.
of things. Where we're focused in AI is really in two areas primarily. One is AI infrastructure. So getting power down, getting performance up in terms of speed, getting better security for the data, governance around that data,
Yeah.
privacy around that data. What I'll call the whole infrastructure piece, whether that's on the hardware side or offload chips or on the software side. I think the great partnership we can have, particularly in the Midwest, which I'm working on here, is between all these entities like the Wexner Center at Ohio State, like Cincinnati Children's, like Cleveland Clinic, like Nationwide Children's. If you partner with all the data that is there with these AI models to help in areas such as diagnosis and drug discovery and stuff like that, I think there's a whole way to open that up. But you need to work with partners that have integrity, right? Because you can't, this is, patient data and such. So you have to have it appropriately blinded, used in the right ways, all those sorts of things. So I think there's a huge opportunity, particularly in the healthcare area. Let's say it around just how you have different compounds that you think might be helpful for a certain disease.
Hmm.
Can you in software and semiconductors? I mean, software is used to simulate like semiconductors and things like that. People like Keynes design it as well. But I mean, so that whole software simulation piece, taking that over to drug discovery, I think is key area. And like, hey, this probably work best for these reasons. How you design your clinical trials, how you run your clinical trials, where you place your clinical trials at, understanding the diversity of participants you want to achieve. All those sorts of things, I think, can really enable and move forward healthcare at a much faster pace because it is a slow process. You typically have years of discovering that compound and you kind of try it out and see if it's safe and other things like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that whole drug discovery and clinical trial and kind of go to market area to really help revolutionize that.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a commercial recently, which a lot of the times I don't watch cable TV, but it was funny that that's what ended up coming on, and I knew we were chatting. It was as like a researcher, scientist, kind of just presenting in a room about what the impacts of kind of what they had created and what this meant for people struggling, and he didn't know that the entire room was patients or like family of patients that basically what they had come up with or the reason why they were standing there alive or whoever got to have an extended life. And like this, most researchers being very introverted and shy, like the terror, but also like excitement of him like seeing that, which I thought was impactful. I didn't have a chance to see kind of who the logo was to sort of promote what they were doing. But I thought was just such a special moment that I was thinking and reflecting on in a world where everything is moving so fast that I think it's so easy to lose sight about why you're doing what you're doing and versus we need to hit this deadline because this means we get access to X amount of dollars or, we don't lose the company. And I think sometimes that, that balance is becoming much larger of a need, I think, in the ecosystems and world. And it seems that kind of sort of your focus and your niche in the Midwest is sort of that, like, almost unique testing ground for, like, "Hey, you can have profits and money and go after and build cool companies, but you can also do this in a way that's a bit more human."
Yeah, I think, one of the things in terms of that balance, I mean, do we have the perspective that humans are there for the economy or the economy are there for humans? And I'd obviously take the later, that the economy is meant to have humans, all of us have a better life in the various definitions of that. And I think with AI and everything else, those fundamental questions are going to come up in terms of, consolidation of power around major LLMs. You're going to have just a number of areas like that. One of the things with AI as well is that AI, let's just say in investment banking, putting a S1 together. Eventually, an AI may do that just as well and more cheaply than a bunch of analysts. But, if you don't do that basic work, what AI doesn't have other is that kind of judgment that comes with time.
Yeah.
So, how do we also utilize AI, but allow for particularly our people coming out of college now and at those levels to learn and grow and develop judgment and those sorts of things. I think those are issues we're going to have to grapple with as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'm curious if you're asking founders the questions, if you're looking, we'll call it as people plan, succession plan, or like development within their teams of, the influence of obviously AI automated systems. And again, taking, we'll call it in some cases, the mundane administrative work. And yes, that'll be able to pump it out. And I do think there's value in the work that I'll call it nobody wants to do, but you do need to interact with those documents and feed and then take your lens accordingly. But also, I think from a larger context of when potential roles are going to get eliminated, how are you looking at kind of in communities almost a total shift on roles, retraining for people, and then looking at how they're going to kind of interact if potentially, let's just say, majority of companies will end up shrinking to, let's just say, 15 and under for people because everything else can be AI driven. There's now this like increasingly shortage of jobs or skill sets that traditionally were used. I'm just curious of how you're kind of looking at that from an immediate perspective. And then as you look forward, as this all kind of is dominoing.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely going kind of more, kind of countrywide economic policy or policy discussions around these things, because part of it too is these LLMs and such are only as smart as the information fed to them. And so there's going to be a whole discussion too around data and data usage and all that type of stuff. And I know there's been, both in Europe and in California elsewhere, some regulations around, personal data and those sorts of things. Most of our companies, other than enhancing what we do, it hasn't materially affected our hiring. I mean, we are continuing to hire in all the different areas. It's been a benefit to kind of leverage, what we're doing and help what we're doing. It hasn't been a replacement so far because we're really working on the cutting edge of what's going on, whether that be in, the combination of AR with biotech, kind of AI infrastructure, all those sorts of things.
Awesome. So I was curious in terms of, the innovations that you look at. I think I should say the narrative and the marketing around sort of all the like exciting things coming out now. I think there's an overlook of, where innovation's taking place because of these new things in very unexpected, places or industries. And I'm wondering, what your experience has been or if you're looking at kind of outside the traditional marketable places right now in terms of the AI world.
A lot of my history early on was in telecommunications and data networking and storage and cloud computing. So what's really happened there is a lot of the innovation in that area that happened maybe 15 years ago or so is now kind of coming back with the hyperscalers. So that's definitely an area that we're focused on. And like I said earlier, really the healthcare area is such a great area, particularly here in the Midwest. If you think about all the great universities, the medical programs here, all the great research institutions, those are the two areas where really, the most probably about half our investments are in.
And you know what? As you kind of look at the entrepreneurs that you're currently working with and the ones that are potentially consider working with, from your experience, what are sort of, the key traits that you look for or where you get that, like, I call it always like the ping in my stomach where I'm like, that's the person for a role that you really look for that you kind of have seen consistently over your career where you're like, they have what it takes.
Yeah. That has actually changed from Silicon Valley to here. In Silicon Valley, you may have a brilliant data scientist that says, what if? I think I could create this new kind of, IP-based wireless network or this new whatever it is. And it's very technically driven, kind of looking at technical possibilities and kind of reshaping what could be. Most of our entrepreneurs here actually are running into everyday problems that they want to solve. So, for example, we have one company called Complion that we ultimately sold successfully. And it was a PhD, MD student at Case who's doing clinical trials. And he's like, these big binders and are pain. The FDA comes in, asks us for to see the previous ones. We have to go and find them off site, and then pages are missing, signatures are missing, all that. What if we had a workflow and automation system that basically we could do all this online and all of it stored in a HIPAA compliant cloud? And he did that for Compliant, and UCSF and Duke and Emory and Northwestern and UC and Extension Health all use that, and we grew the company up. So it's really we tend to find a lot more real world problems here. Another example is Aware, which created really kind of a very strong, powerful AI engine for analyzing communication, whether that be email communication, whether that be Slack communication, Microsoft Teams communication, both for kind of abnormalities, sensitive information flowing that shouldn't, toxic environment that shouldn't he be there, toxic words. Also kind of created a sentiment score in terms of how teams are working together. And again, all the data would be kind of on a aggregated basis, so it wouldn't pinpoint people, but just teams and communications and all that. And that came about because the founder there was at Nationwide Insurance, and way back in the day was trying to roll out Microsoft Yammer. And I said, wait, that'd be like letting people use their cell phones. We can only imagine what type of information or kind of language flow in a Yammer
Yeah.
type environment. So he formed Aware to create kind of at the time it was called LLM, but basically an LLM to analyze all this, communication going back and forth in enterprises. And
Yeah.
ultimately we merged that with Mimecast, which has, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and all these customers, is really the AI engine behind analyzing all this information to kind of find inappropriate, content and or, sentiment analysis. So much of it here is really around, everyday, for example, when we're working on potentially a new investment, looking at different imaging in the cancer area. And, how can we take those images and learn from them in terms of diagnosis, in terms of treatment, and in terms of drug discovery? So I'd say it's a lot more bottoms up here in the Midwest. Like here's the real world problem. How can we kind of solve this? And Silicon Valley is more like, okay, what could we potentially do? And then find the market that would really transform or create.
Right, kinda like the functional over the, infinite,
Yeah.
shall we say.
Yeah.
And is there, as you kinda look through, kinda back, is there a particular deal or entrepreneur or something where you were like, that is your most kind of proud moment of where you kind of all the pieces came together better than you could have imagined?
Yeah, I think going back to eFuse, I mean,
Yeah.
eFuse is really a platform for esports and e-gaming. And we basically, the fellow Matt Benson, the CEO, came in as an intern, then came in, actually delayed his graduation, came in as the EIR, finished up his graduation online. And I basically gave him $100,000 at a time. So here's 100,000, go get matched with someone else, to come in and make some progress. And he kept doing that over time. And because the brand is so important in that case, that it be a brand seen as trustworthy and all that by the gamers and esports participants, he got a lot of great influencers involved in this. Travis Kelsey's group is an investor. Mr. Beast has been involved with it, all these different types of things, Seth Curry and such. But, like I was saying, he built up a nice team, was growing nicely, partnering with the Epics and the Activisions and the Riot Games. And then we're looking at another area, which is, how to deliver, different opportunities for promotion, whether it be Crocs or Whataburger or such, to the gamers that are relevant, but don't freeze their screen, don't seem out of line with what they're looking for. He did a lot of research, a lot of intelligence that had to be built behind that. And he then started building up that area. And like I said, I mean, he's grown it in 5 years from nothing to 25 million. We likely next year will be doing close to 50 million. He's also brought on people like there's a fellow Sandeep who's an advisor who had been the chief data officer of the Trade Desk, which is about a 20-40 billion-dollar market cap public company, who has that expertise in kind of, I'll call it ad tech, and
Yeah.
such. So he was willing to kind of build up the team and kind of put any insecurities behind him,
Yeah.
and really building up this great team and taking risks and making decisions. And so a number of those, both on the technology side, there's another one, Dave over at CleverMex was on the biotech side. It's a spin out of Nationwide Children's in Ohio State. And we're going down initial market, pharmaceutical. And it turned out that a little bit harder to enroll in that market than we had hoped for. Made a pivot into cystic fibrosis, got a partnership with Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, did some great work there. Now we're going on to our next study in different complementary areas. And
Yeah.
kind of across the board, he's working with world-class founders. He brought in two really superstar business development people. One is advisor, one is a full-time person. Brought in some
Mhm.
great, clinical people, regulatory people, all that. So, and these people, for both of them, it's their first time in the startup. So
Yeah.
having that confidence and security and trust to kind of build up a team that literally has more experience in street cred than they do,
Yeah.
and build up a team that's almost, kind of as good or better than them, kind of around them is,
Yeah.
and the results kind of then speak for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's the most magical part of any founder I worked with, or I think humbling, because I think sometimes more in your junior career, it can be really intimidating to be around of people that are, quote unquote, smarter than you, went to all these different schools, and you're like, okay, I don't know anything. But as soon as, they have such clarity around what they want to create, but also the humility to say, like, I actually have no idea how we're going to get there. So who do we need to pull in to figure out how to solve this problem? And then you just start piecing the information together. And I think that's also what equals the playing field across, we'll call it, any type of ego or hierarchy, is that, not everybody knows everything, and we can only figure it out if we really do this together, which I think is so powerful, but also really gets missed a lot too in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, yeah, and each of these founders kind of became themselves, which was nice to see. Because at first, sometimes they might, because different board members, investors, different personalities, so it's kind of like this way to that. At a certain point, when the founders become themselves and just comfortable in their own skin, and just say, "Hey, that is a remarkable thing," and they kind of can do great things. And just today, I had coffee with Dave, which we do it once a month. Yeah, I'm talking to Matt Benson over at eFuse probably once a week. And just that relationship is so important. So they're seeking information and input from me and others and taking that in, weighing it, making decisions. Good things happen then.
Yeah, I love it. And before we close it out with some rapid fire questions, I'm curious to know, as you look forward with what the Ohio Innovation Fund's doing, what's the thing that you're most excited about as you look forward and what your team's doing together?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess one of the things I'll say is what's been important to us is our student experience program. Actually, like I said, Matt Benson was an intern. I work one of my colleagues, Faith Voinovich, principal here, came through the internship program. We've had interns that have gone on to Welsh Carson. We've had interns going on to Goldman. We've had interns go into our startups like Aware. So kind of continue to build up that virtuous cycle or that positive cycle of successful entrepreneurs, successful initial careers as the people go up. So working, kind of working with side to side with those in the Midwest that have that entrepreneurial spirit that we talked about earlier versus big company mentality is one of the things I enjoy the most. I really think that there's a transformational aspect to healthcare that you talk about kind of built for this that I was a little bit built for here in the Midwest, which is, having an understanding of technology, of how our LLMs work, as far as artificial intelligence, as far as cybersecurity around that, around the data, the privacy, and all that. And then also all the healthcare data that's residing here in the Midwest, putting those together for patient good in terms of diagnosis and drug discovery. That is an area that's super exciting for me kind of going forward. And that's really an area I'm super excited by and want to continue to kind of focus on. But like I said, we have companies that are doing AI infrastructure, AI, governance, and all that. So I feel pretty good about our portfolio. The other area of portfolio we spent a little bit of time in beyond biotech and AI and cyber is kind of the whole area of AR, VR and where that's going, augmented reality, virtual reality. We have one company, Afference, that does haptics, which is basically creating like the simulating real feeling through the nerves and such. It's based on research at Case, and we actually did a seed round. Now we're about to close our next round, a nice 3x up. So that was positive, and so that's kind of cool stuff. I mean, there's a lot of really cool, good stuff going here, and just like I said earlier, that raw materials here. It's just a matter of taking the expertise and forming and scaling and building up these companies and applying it, that raw material, and applying it to people to allow these companies to scale and be successful. So I just enjoy that and seeing the rewards of that, both in the marketplace and then obviously with our investors financially.
Yeah, no, I love that. Awesome. So I'm going to give you five rapid fire questions here to sort of close out together. I would love to know, what's your one non-negotiable habit or mindset that sets the tone for your day?
I don't know which date's gonna look like. There's different things that come up. I don't have a schedule. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
things come up. My thing is add value and get stuff done. I don't like just add value
Yep.
and how can I help our portfolio companies that need it get better today?
Yeah.
That's
I
kind of
love
what I
it.
focus my day on.
What's a book, mentor, or experience that most shaped your leadership style?
I would say one of my original venture partners in Silicon Valley was Don Lucas, and he was actually one of the early investors in Oracle and Cadence and some of those companies. And he was very much similar in terms of, he had to, work with Larry and such. He's working with different strong personalities. And so that influenced my ability to the earlier question of years to be able to be that ability to work with stronger personalities, but also be that model of balance as well, of stability, of being that rudder, those sorts of things. He also is very similar to me in just wanting to get things done and just add value and not kind of, focus on extraneous things, but kind of just really help the entrepreneurs. Last part of that is one of the things I think is really different about myself and our group is that we almost like we're not a founder because that would be disrespectful to founders to call ourselves that, but we really kind of share their passion and share their vision and want to be successful. So that kind of partnership with founders is so important to us.
I deeply resonate with that because I always say my two barriers to entry to work with me is one, can I get just as excited about your vision as you are? Two, do we have values alignment? And the rest is how fast do you want to
Yeah.
go? Yeah, I get it. What's one lesson from failure that stayed with you?
This was a little bit more in Silicon Valley, but if you have to there's probabilities, but there has to be a reasonable probability that technology is going to work. A lot of times, when you're doing a big deal or big potential deal, that piece of it. And the other piece is that it's very difficult when the market is years away. Because unless you're very skinny, you're bringing a lot of money, it just won't happen. One of my first deal was actually optical solutions. That is the fiber to the building, fiber to the home space. And now a huge opportunity, right? I was a couple years early. And we partnered with Corning and all that. Now we ultimately sold the company and had a successful exit, but it was a couple years of just waiting for that market to happen and trying to make that market happen. And all of a sudden it does, and it's so rewarding. But that piece of it is difficult. The market isn't there, or you have issues with technology. It's difficult.
Yeah, I guess how do you compartmentalize? I mean, with anything, yes, there has to be a market. Timing is everything, and there's obviously always a bit of element of luck in there. Because sometimes you never know how big something's gonna hit. Does it make you less risk tolerant or more risk tolerant when you're like, I was almost like we were almost right on it. We just missed like that window.
I just spent a lot more time trying to understand what could potentially unlock that market. So a lot more diligence around, okay, what market forces, what particular way of using this could really unlock that potential market for that, and also balance the portfolio. So the
Yep,
portfolio isn't all about like, okay, we're building this thing, and if the market develops, having a little bit of portfolio, balance there as well, I think is important.
for sure. And then, well, actually, you already answered the one that would kind of like recent founder that's inspired you. As the last question, in your own words, define what built for this means to you.
For me, it's just been a collection. It's almost like my someone's internal DNA. Like you talked about earlier in terms of are you more in structure in a certain area, or are you more free form, limited information, kind of, make decisions and adapt. And so I think that DNA is built into people. And there's not a right or wrong. It just is which way someone is. And with our student experience program, we try and help people figure that out for better or worse, whichever is best for them. But then really it's a collection of the experiences, working with both healthcare and technology, working with early stage companies and helping them scale from a few people to 10 to 100 people plus, from nothing to, being successful in their trials with the FDA and or growing to 10, 20, 50 million, $100 million in revenue. Being involved with, kind of building investment syndicates, which is greatly needed here. That's one of the things we do in the Midwest because it's not like we have Sand Hill Road here. So
Yeah.
you have to do that work on that side, and really all that coming together to kind of take the best of what was learned in Silicon Valley and kind of pair that with the greatest unique attributes of the Midwest and bring the two together to create something bigger. And that's kind
Yeah.
of what I almost feel if I look at my career, I was really kind of built for this as kind of a capstone in terms of hopefully continue to transform, Midwest VC and being highly successful in doing that. Like you said, also having that market impact as well, or the impact on people as well, where it's not just, you flip something and made some money and everyone might be worse off for it, yet people are better off for what was done.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so, for anybody who's listening that really resonates with the mission of what you're up to and how you're creating the programs and sort of that venture ecosystem, what is the best way for people to understand how to get involved with the Ohio Innovation Fund and/or potentially investing?
Yeah, I mean, so we return anything that kind of comes into us. So we both have a website at ohioinnovationfund.com, or they can reach out to my email, which is just wbaumel at ohioinnovationfund.com. And always glad to follow up and talk to people, whether they're thinking about joining a startup, whether they have a startup they're interested in getting financing for, or what have you. Always, happy to listen and help to the extent we can.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you making time. It was so great to learn more about you, your history, what you're up to now, and the values line between kind of people, impact, and innovation. So thank you.
I thank you. All right. See you later.